Hello and welcome to Reading the Gospels together for May 7th. And today we're looking at Mark chapter 13. Now, we're used to regarding what Jesus said and did as timeless, and in so many ways it is. What Jesus taught us about what it means to love God and to love one another, the power of self-sacrifice, the intimacy of prayer, the grace and mercy of God, and so much more. All of that is indeed timeless. But that's not to take Jesus completely out of his time and place. The parables of Jesus are closely tied to the land and customs of the Middle East of the first century. The conflicts Jesus had with the Pharisees and Sadducees, not to mention his run-ins with Herod and Pilate, are similarly of a distinctive place and time. Nevertheless, there are principles established by these conflicts and lessons derived from the parables which remain current, very current, when translated into our world and situation. That's part of what we've been doing throughout this entire series. But of all the things that Jesus said and did, the end of the temple era in Jerusalem, in fact, the very destruction of the temple and the sacrificial system it represented, is very much locked into the situation of the day. And the words of Mark 13, which surround that very destruction and the terrible persecutions instituted by Nero and continued by his successors, were of great importance to the audience to which Mark writes, the Christians of 60s AD Jerusalem and Rome. When reading Mark 13, we have to keep the historical situation very firmly in mind. It very much is an address from Jesus to the Christians of the day. Now, this chapter doesn't just happen out of the blue. We've been building up to it for a while, from the moment Jesus rides into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. Remember the fig tree that was cursed and withered. Remember Jesus' denunciation of the temple as a den of robbers. Remember the parable of the vineyard where the owner's representatives were beaten and killed, eventually even the owner's son, leading to the owner doing away with the tenants, to put it mildly, and putting others in their place. Or the denunciation of the Sadducees as in error, not knowing the scriptures or the power of God. Or the chief priests, teachers of the law, and the elders looking for a way to have Jesus arrested and even killed because they knew these things were about them. And with all that preparatory work now done, here comes the dénouement, the big reveal, Mark 13. As Jesus was leaving the temple, we read, one of the disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." "Do you see all these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." It's impossible for us to conceive of the impact of these words. First of all, the temple was one of the great buildings of the world, 40 years under construction. Many a Roman visitor of the day remarked that there was nothing in Rome itself that could compare. It was not only massive in size, but in construction. There are stones still in place in the Temple Mount, the plaza upon which the temple was built, which weigh over 40 tons and are the size of a transport trailer. Small wonder one of the disciples says, "What massive stones, what magnificent buildings." But what's hard for us to grasp is the significance of the temple to Jewish life and faith. It was the center point of it all. Every Jew was required to make pilgrimage there. Every Jew was required to offer sacrifice at the temple. Every Jew, no matter where they lived, paid the temple tax to keep it all going. As many as 7% or more of all Jews were actually employed at the temple, performing the countless rituals which kept the faith alive. And the temple was viewed as the very dwelling place of the presence of God. There's just nothing in 21st century Presbyterianism which compares. There's no national or religious building which represents in and of itself the sum total of our national identity and our deeply held faith. And Jesus says, it's coming down. Which means more than just a building coming down. The whole of the Jewish faith would have to radically change from the temple as its focal point to the scriptures and the daily and weekly personal rituals as central. Impossible for the disciples to imagine. But Jesus saw it coming, and he wanted the people to be prepared. Now, its destruction would happen within a generation as the climax of the Jewish revolt against Rome, which had been smoldering for years but caught fire in Caesarea in 66 AD and quickly spread throughout the country. By 70 AD, the Romans had their best troops engaged and besieged Jerusalem. Worse yet, the city was tearing itself up from the inside out as various rebel pretenders declared themselves Messiah. The city was divided into hostile and often violent factions. All these messiahs were, of course, false. And ultimately, in the Romans came, putting the city to the sword and the torch and the lever, and sending this temple, stone by massive stone, crashing to the ground. You can visit Jerusalem today and still see the massive stones littering the ground at the base of the Temple Mount like a giant Jenga puzzle. And Jesus sees it coming, and he warns his people to watch, and when they see it coming, to flee. Worse yet, if that were possible, was the persecution instituted by Rome. The warning that Christians would be hated by all people was dramatically fulfilled a generation later when in Rome itself, the Christians were viciously persecuted by Nero, being regarded, as one historian put it, as notoriously depraved and holding to a deadly superstition. The history of the early church, in fact, that shows all these warnings were needed. The persecution was brutal, taking the life even of Peter and of Paul, both the great mentors of Mark. Nero blamed the devastating fires in Rome on the Christians, a convenient group to scapegoat as they refused stubbornly to worship the Roman gods. Now, when you see this coming, and Mark even adds, let the reader understand, run. Flee to the mountains, says Jesus. And many Christians did just that. With the war approaching Jerusalem, many Christians fled to Jordan and beyond, waiting out the war and returning to Jerusalem in the late 80s and early 90s AD. But the Jerusalem church was never really strong again. The baton had been passed to the churches further afield in the empire, who had their own persecutions to endure, as Jesus makes clear. But he also makes this clear in Mark 13. It isn't over yet. It isn't over yet. The Son of Man will gather his people home from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. When? No one knows, says Jesus, not even me. But God knows. Until that time, do the work God has given you to do and keep watch, says Jesus. Now, the Christians of Mark's Rome of the 60s AD needed these words and heeded these words, and they found courage. Jesus had seen their troubles coming. The Christians of 70 AD Jerusalem heeded these words, many escaping the coming devastation and survived to share and to spread the faith again. Christians throughout the ages, themselves facing persecution, look back at these words of Jesus and found the strength to carry on. And for us, the important words are at the end, when Jesus wraps it all up and says, what I say to you, I say to everyone, watch. Do the work that God has assigned you to do. Don't shirk your responsibilities to God, to your fellow Christians, and to your fellow man. Be alert and never lose hope. That's Mark chapter 13. Tomorrow we're going to start slowing down a bit. There's too much in chapters 14, 15, and 16 to cover in just 3 days. So we're going to half them up. Tomorrow, Mark chapter 14, verses 1 through 41. Some really important and wonderful stuff. And we'll see you then.